Hello students, welcome back to your ESC3017. So this week is your third week of class. So let's just recap last week's sessions, last week's lessons. Sorry that last week's video was all over the place, but hopefully I can just go back to using Zoom. Okay, so last week we've covered from the formation of the universe and the formation of the Earth, and then we look at life on Earth. We also look at the characteristics and the building blocks of life, and also the driver for biodiversity. So remember all of this, right? So characteristics and the building blocks of life. We have metabolism, we have homeostasis, we have adaptations, and also we have reproduction, and the building blocks of life. Everything is linked via DNA. And the driver for biodiversity is, of course, DNA, the mutations, and also climate of the surrounding. And so this week we will cover evolution. Okay, so okay, before we get a little deeper into evolution, I just want to mention that evolution is a theory, and as all theory, it needs to be proven before it can be a fact, but now it's still a theory. This is what the scientific community has agreed on. I mean, evolution. This is what the scientific community agreed that, okay, this happens, but it's still a theory, okay? I have to say this because I don't want to be the reason if like some of you, because most of us, we have faith, and I know that faith contradict with the theory of evolution, particularly for the formation of humans. So we learn this for the sake of the knowledge, but don't lose your faith. Okay, learn it so that we know, but take it with a pinch of salt. Okay. Okay, so the theory of evolution. This is, I didn't. Okay. This is Darwin. Most of you know the theory of evolution. Darwin comes up with the theory, and this is Wallace. Actually, Wallace and Darwin came up with the same theory of evolution. But they actually did not work together and come up with the theory. They independently came up with the same theory, and they both lived during the same time. They were actually friends. Scientifically, they are friends because they research the same thing. And they normally communicate via letter. And interestingly, like for Darwin, he did a voyage of 5 years voyage, I think, all around the world. And his role at that time during the voyage was to take note of all this biodiversity of these organisms in different land. So that's how he managed to observe all of these organisms and came up with that theory. Wallace, on the other hand, he was doing his own voyage as well, not the same as Darwin. And when he was actually in Malaysia, in the Malay archipelago at that time, when he was here, he sent a letter to Darwin telling that he actually have the same theory as well. So they both agree on the theory. They both came up with the same theory independently. Okay, it's just that Wallace was not as famous as Darwin. Anyway, so their theory is natural selection. It was first named. They both call it natural selection, but after a while, they decided to change the name. Actually, Wallace proposed that they change the name to survival of the fittest. And Darwin was actually hesitated, but he changed it anyway. So natural selection and survival of the fittest theory, both are the same. They just named differently. So basic mechanisms for evolution. Actually, okay, there are 4. The mechanisms for survival of the fittest, natural selection, and then mutation, and genetic drift, and also migration. These things link, especially mutation, linked with everything. So natural selection, aka also known as survival of the fittest. This is when the organisms with an advantage to survive through reproduction phase of life and pass their gene to their offspring. So those organisms that can survive better will survive and produce offspring. And the theory is the offspring will have the same fitness to survive and continue to reproduce. And the strength, the fitness is passed on to generation. Again, its gene is passed on to generation. And organisms without any advantage tend to die before able to reproduce. Over time, organisms with an advantage propagate, while organisms without any advantage die out. So the product is adaptation of species to its environment. So for example, for a plant, for example, living in a land, and then suddenly the land experience a terrible drought, and most of the plant will die, but some will survive, and this plant that can survive will produce offsprings, other plants, and the offsprings, the next generation of the plant, will be able to survive, and those plants that cannot survive the drought will die. Okay, so over time, only the plant that can survive the drought will propagate and dominate the land. So that's survival of the fittest. So there are 2 theories of survival of the fittest. So this is a theory, Darwin's theory, the survival of the fittest. The theory is, okay, for example, giraffe were before this had shortened necks, but nowadays giraffes has longer necks. Okay, so the theory is, okay, before there were giraffe normally had shorter necks, and they all ate from the lower branch of the tree, but suddenly there are a few of the giraffes were born with longer neck, and because these giraffes' necks were longer, they can reach the top part of the top leaves of the tree. So they are more able to access food from the top part of the tree, and the giraffes with a shorter neck ended up dying because it didn't get enough food, and the process continues. Okay, the giraffe from the with a longer neck reproduce and produce, and suddenly some of the next generations developed a longer neck, okay, born with it, just mutation. And then the giraffe with the longer neck will survive better than the shorter neck, and the shorter neck will die because they didn't get enough food, and then we will end up with just long necked giraffes, okay, a taller, longer necked giraffe, because this gives them a higher survival rate in their environment, because with the longer neck being taller, they can access the leaves on the higher part of the tree. There was actually another theory telling the same story of how giraffe get a longer neck, but this theory actually was rejected because it really doesn't really make sense. So the theory was shorter neck giraffe, they tried to reach to the higher leaves, so they started to stretch their neck, and because they start to stretch their necks, and over time their necks gets longer and then they stretch more and then it gets longer. In this theory, they just, like for example, I want a longer hand, longer arm. So I just stretch it, and then over time I will have longer arms. And somehow this long arm that I developed by stretching will be passed on to my generation, to my children. So that doesn't make sense, okay? So this theory was rejected. This theory, Darwin's theory, survival of the fittest, makes more sense. This is another example of survival of the fittest. So for the here we have a bunch of beetles. So the white beetles are susceptible to pesticides, so they die easily. They die easier with the exposure to pesticides, but not the red beetle. So the first generation here we have the beetles. With the dominant beetles are the white one, and then the red beetles was the minority. And then pesticides was applied, and because the white beetles, they are more susceptible to the pesticides, most of them die, okay? But the red beetle is not is resistant to the pesticide, so it survived. So after the first pesticide application, only 2 white beetles survived, and the red beetles survived, of course, because it's resistant to the pesticide. And after a while, the red beetles and the white beetles, they reproduce, and at this time, because the red beetles has more fitness, and at this point, there are not that much competition, the red beetles can reproduce at the same, reproduce more offspring. And then pesticide is applied again. The white beetles, most of the white beetles died, and we are left with red beetles as the dominant beetles, but not the white one. Okay, so you can get from this from this type of community of population, more white beetles than red. Because of the survival of the fittest, the red beetles eventually becomes the dominant beetles in that area. Okay, I want you to look at this this artwork by Giovanni Stanchi. This was painted in the 17th century. So this is a painting of vegetables and fruits and vegetables. And the centerpiece here, if you can see, is a watermelon. And we have here grapes, and I don't know what this is. We have here pomegranate. We have, this looks like very much like lemon to me actually. We have peaches, we have probably apples here, and this is, I think, celery. So what is different in this painting and the fruits that we know right now in this page? Okay, so this is 17th century. We are now in the 21st century, so 400 years ago. So if you look at this watermelon, the watermelon has lots and lots and lots of seeds. And the flesh of the watermelon is kind of, I don't know, like spiral, quite segmented and spiral. Okay, that's not a normal occurrence of for watermelon during our time, right now. So you can see that within 400 years, watermelon has evolved from looking like this to looking like this. Yeah. So that's only in 400 years. And this is corn. This is the regular corn that we have now. Corn, actually, the wild corn actually looks like this. So this is the original corn, the wild corn, and then people start to like breed them for having for their kernels. So they breed them, and finally we got corn that looks like this with more kernels, and so we can eat it. Same as watermelon, it was like this, and then people keep on breeding them until it looks like this. Okay, something that has less seeds and also more flesh and just more watermelon. So this actually shows artificial selection. So the natural selection is something that survival of the fittest. It happens naturally. Okay, so at one point mutation happens, and that mutation gives a higher fitness rate, a higher fitness survival to that individual. And then because it has a higher fitness, it will survive until reproduction, and then it will pass on that mutation with that advantage mutation to its offspring. But in artificial selection, similar theory, just the mutation happens through breeding. Okay, the fitness happens through breeding with the help of human will, you know, I want the next generation of plants to have less seeds, so I will take a lesser seed fruit and a lesser seed producing plant, and breed it with a lesser seed producing plant, and keep on breeding and breeding until I got the plant that I want, that produce no seed at all. Okay, for example, this watermelon. So let's look at this. This actually, okay, the evolution of bacteria on a mega Petri dish. I really love this experiment because you can see mutation happens real time, and how that mutations give an advantage to that bacteria to survive in that environment, and how because of that mutation it gives just that one bacteria advantage over the other bacteria to survive and propagate, and just killing the other bacteria that has not produced the advantage mutation. Okay, let's look.
So what we ended up building was basically a Petri dish, except that it's 2 feet by 4 feet. And the way we set it up is that there are 9 bands, and at the base of each of these bands, we put a normal Petri dish thick agar with different amounts of antibiotic. On the outside, there's no antibiotic. Just in from that, there's barely more than the E. coli can survive. Inside of that, there's 10 times as much, 100 times, and then finally the middle band has 1,000 times as much antibiotic. And then across the top of it, pour some thin agar that bacteria can move around in. The background is black because there's ink in it, and the bacteria appear as white. First, you see they spread in the area where there's no antibiotic up until the point they can no longer survive. Then a mutant appears on the right. It's resistant to the antibiotic, it spreads until it starts to compete with other mutants around it. When these mutants hit the next boundary, they too have to pause and develop new mutations to make it into 10 times as much antibiotic. And then you see the different mutants repeat this at 100. And after about 11 days, they finally make it into 1,000 times as much antibiotic as the wild type can survive. And so we can see by this process of accumulating successive mutations that bacteria, which are normally sensitive to an antibiotic, can evolve resistance to extremely high concentrations in a short period of time.
Okay, so this this megaplate Petri dish shows how mutation can give an advantage to that that organism, to that bacteria, to survive in an environment that actually could kill it. Okay, so mutation is something that is spontaneous. It just happened. Our body mutate. Sometimes our body will produce mutation, but because mutation can be harmful, normally cells have a mechanisms to kill that mutation. But sometimes mutation happens and just show and give like something advantages, some advantage. And so instead of being a disadvantage to the cell, it actually gives an advantage to the cell. And with mutation, that survival of the fittest is possible. Okay. Okay. So this shows a wild type, I believe this is Drosophila, I believe this is a fruit fly. This shows a normal fruit fly, a wild type fruit fly. This shows a mutant fruit fly. And I think that this mutant fruit fly only had a single base mutation in its genome. That one single mutation can cause the fly to have legs where its antenna usually is. So mutation, even a little mutation, can actually cause a big effect to the organisms. So you can imagine that, okay, this fly suddenly developed this mutation in its cell, and it developed these legs. And you can imagine that if these legs gives the fly an advantage to survive better than other flies in that habitat, in that community. This fly will survive and reproduce other flies that have legs instead of the antenna. Okay, and over time we will have flies that have legs instead of antenna. Okay, so mutation. So if we like draw it in as a diagram, you can see that the first, okay, this is the original, the parent organism, and then after one generation, it developed one mutation and two mutation. So this is still the same. So the mutation number one is disadvantage, is a disadvantage, so it cannot produce, just die after one generation. And then mutation, the mutant number two produce more. Okay, this is still a wild type. And then mutant number two produce 2.1, mutant 2.1. Wild type produce, so this is still wild type, and it produced mutant number 3 here. Okay, so this is still number 2. And this, it ends up that the wild type and mutant number 3 cannot compete against mutant number 2 and 2.1. So mutant 2.1 and mutant 2 will keep on producing more offsprings and keep on reproducing. So you can see that the wild type can end up dying after a few generations. Okay, so mutation creates variation, and the unfavorable mutation selected against. So this, like for this one, it cannot survive, cannot compete with the other types. And then reproduction and mutation occurs again. Favorable mutation more likely to survive. So these two cannot compete with the other mutants. So that's what they have. That's what they have. That's what they have observed in this mega Petri dish, mega plate. Mutate after. So this has no antibiotic, and then 1 times antibiotic, some bacteria started to produce mutants that can survive the antibiotic. And after, when they reach here, they pause a bit and then create more mutants, which can survive a higher dose of antibiotic, and so on and so forth, until they can survive 1,000 times of the antibiotic dose. And that's why people, please finish your antibiotic and take it on time, okay? Because we don't want to have bad bacteria that can survive antibiotic, because it will come to a point that we don't have antibiotic to kill it, and we will stay sick and die. Yeah. So what exactly is mutation? So mutation, I keep on saying mutation, okay? What is mutation? Mutation is a change in DNA. So you know DNA is our building blocks. So DNA has all these base pairs. So we have G, C, T, A. So mutation is a change of DNA. So there are a few types of mutation. We have point mutations, we have deletions, and also repetition. And mutation may cause malfunctional proteins. So, for example, if like, so DNA is a string of but we have the base pairs is either A, T, G, C. So it's just, you know, strings of it. So maybe so maybe A, T, C, G, G, C, T. So mutation is change in maybe 1, maybe 2, or just delete chunks, you know, things like that. So it's just a change, mutation causes change in that sequence of DNA that we have in our cells. So in a no mutation, so the DNA level, it's TTC. In a silent mutation, so TTC, so how DNA affect our cell is by, first the DNA will be translated into RNA. Okay, RNA is like DNA, but so DNA is double strand. We have 2. RNA is just 1 strand. Okay, and then from the RNA it will be transcribed into protein, and this protein is what drives all our functions, our bodily functions, okay, the cell function and everything. So if at the DNA level, it's if the DNA is changed, the RNA will change and the protein will change. Okay, so for example here, no mutation, the original sequence is TTC. So for TTC, when it's translated into mRNA, it becomes, when it's translated into mRNA, it becomes AAG. And then AAG, when it's transcribed into protein, it is LIS. Okay, so LIS look like that. In a silent, okay, so point mutation is only, it is a change in only 1 sequence of the DNA. Okay, so only 1. So in a silent mutation, only 1, in the silent mutation, from TTC, the original sequence, it becomes TTT. Okay, so the C is changed into T. When it's translated into mRNA, it is AAA. And then when this is transcribed into protein, it still stays as LIS. So it is silent mutation. It's silent because although the DNA is changed, but the final protein is still the same. So that is called silent mutation. And for a nonsense mutation, so we are talking about point mutations here, still only one sequence is one base is changed. So here from TTC it becomes ATC, and ATC, when it's translated into mRNA, it's UAG, and UAG actually means stop. Instead of having a LIS amino acid there, there's nothing. It's just, okay, this protein stops here. So it will truncate that protein. The protein, instead of being a long sequence protein, is just a short protein. So that's what is called nonsense, because it's nonsense. It's just, you just stop it. Okay. For missense, so from TTC, for a conservative missense, from a TTC, it becomes TCC, and then for its mRNA is AGG instead of AAG, and this is transcribed into arginine, archaea. It is called conservative because it conserves the functional group of the amino acid, which is this group right here. You can see this group right here. So it is, no. Oh, yeah, it conserves here actually. It conserves the group right there. It is a positively charged group. But for a non-conservative missense mutation, the the protein from it. So the DNA from TTC becomes TGC, and then the mRNA is ACG, and then when it's transcribed, it becomes THR, and then what its functional group of the amino acid is not the same as the original right here, okay? And that is called non-conservative. So mutation, you can see that only one small mutation in the DNA level can cause a big difference to its protein level. So this is how DNA is translated into RNA. So we have, so this blue right here, these are DNA. So the template strand is the strand that the RNA polymerase, so this is an enzyme. So the template strand is where the RNA polymerase will read. So this is the template strand. So the RNA polymerase will read this strand. So this strand is the strand that carries the information. So this non-template strand is just a couple of that, the pair of that template strand of the DNA, because DNA is double helix. DNA is a double strand, like not like RNA. RNA is only a single strand. So the RNA polymerase will read the template strand and will produce this RNA. So this RNA is going through here. The RNA polymerase will move along the template strand to this way, and new mRNA base will get added here. So this one, CAC will become GUG, A here it will add C, and then A, and then C, and then A, and so on. That's how DNA is translated into mRNA. So from the mRNA, each codon, so mRNA is still a sequence, right? Like here, ATGCCG CAA. It will read, and then from the mRNA, ribosomes, which is another protein that will read the mRNA, and the ribosome will call will call tRNA to bring amino acids that is that matches the message from the mRNA. So here ATGCCG. So you can see here ATG. This is actually first letter, second letter, and here third letter. Okay. So from so the ribosome will read the mRNA in 3 letters chunks and translate it and transcribe it into the different amino acids. So these are all amino acids, and a sequence of amino acid, a chain of amino acids are called protein. Okay, so that's the connection between DNA, RNA, and protein. Okay. So I will not go too deep into this, although I think I have. But anyway, this is if you want to know more, you can always look at YouTube. They have actually very cool videos on how everything works, and of course you can read this as well. So, but important point, for a mutation to be hereditary, it needs to happen in the reproductive cell. So we have our body, like especially for multi-cell organisms like us, insects, we have multiple cells in our body. So for example, if only one cell on my hand develop mutation, okay, my children will not get that mutation because that mutation happened on my hand, and I don't pass the cells from my hand to my children. Okay, I can only pass the if the mutation happens in my reproductive cell, which is for for women it's ovum, for males it's sperm. Only if the mutation happens in ovum or a sperm can that mutation be passed to the offsprings. Okay, because we can only pass those two cells. We can only pass our reproductive cells to our offspring, and once the reproductive cells becomes another organisms, that offspring will have that mutation all over his body, all over its body, his body, whatever. So if the mutation happens anywhere else on the body, that will not be passed on to the next generation. So here we have two picture. So the woman here has green eyes that can be passed down because she has that because it's hereditary. But if for this man right here, he has big muscles, a very muscular, strong body, that cannot be passed on to his offspring. Okay, because it's not something that is passable. So it's the same as the theory of the giraffe with the long neck. If the other theory said, this theory of Lamarck, he said that the giraffe just stretched its neck, and over time, giraffe developed long necks. That doesn't happen. Okay, it can only happen. It can only pass down to its offspring if the mutation happens in the reproductive cell. So, okay, the third one of mechanisms of evolution is genetic drift. So genetic drift is when some organisms leave behind more offspring than others by chance, not because of they are more at advantage of surviving. So this causes more of their genes to populate the next generation. So the genes of these organisms dominate the next generation, not because it is more fit than the other organisms. Okay, it happens by chance. So for example, this picture you can see. So we have green beetles, and then we have brown beetles, and then suddenly there's a man walking by, and just by chance he stepped on only the green beetles. It's not like the brown beetles has a higher chance of surviving. It's just by chance they did not get stepped on. The man only stepped on the green beetles. So for the next generation, the brown beetle will have more of its genes in that population than the green beetles. So it's not because of it has a more chance of survival. It's just by chance. It's luck. Okay. The next one is migration. So migration, as the name suggests, when organisms move from one place to another place and then populate that place. So this is just move. It's just migrate to another place. Because so in this picture, you can see that only the red beetles go from the land to the island, and not the yellow beetles. So that's why in that island they only have the red beetles. So let's go to types of evolution. We have two types of evolution. The first one is microevolution, and the second one is macroevolution. So microevolution is evolution at a small scale within a single population, and macroevolution is evolution at a big scale above species level. So macroevolution, it includes species. Okay. So microevolution is a change in gene frequency within a population. So for example, population in Malaysia only. Okay. So say in Malaysia we have 80% of our frogs are green, and then we have 20% of our frogs are brown. And then suddenly after a year, 60% of our frogs are green, and then 40% of our frogs are brown. So that is a microevolution. It's an evolution that happens within a population. So only, you know, in Malaysia, and it happens like it is small scale. In this case, only after a year, maybe after 2 years. Okay, it's only a small scale. So that is microevolution. So gene frequency, so 1, 2, 2 brown genes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, 2 brown, so 8 green. So you know how to calculate the gene frequency. So 20 brown green because 20% brown genes, because 2/10, the total of the genes times 100. Yeah, okay, very easy. So that's 20%. So macroevolution is evolution at a bigger scale. So for example, origins of mammals and radiation of flowering plants. So it is big. It's like how that example, you know, origins of mammals, how mammals came to be, or how flowering plants came to form. So that is an example of macroevolution. So there are 4 patterns for macroevolution. The first one is stasis, second is character change, third is lineage splitting or speciation, and then the fourth one is extinction. So macroevolution stasis. Stasis is when the body form does not change over time. So here we have body form in the x-axis, and y-axis we have time. So if you see at this graph, the body form, first body form is here. So this is the first organism, the parent organism, and then during this time here, the organism starts to split, okay, into 2 species. So the blue species here and the red species, after this time, right here, the body form stays. Okay, the body form does not change at all over time. So that is stasis. It's just it stays the same over time. It doesn't change anything. This fish, if I'm not mistaken, it has been like this for 50,000 years at least, I think, if I'm not mistaken. So this is an example of stasis. The body change does not change over time. The body type does not change over time. The second pattern of macroevolution is character change. So character change, as the name suggests, the body form change over time. So for example, here and the same. So parent organism starts to develop and starts to split into two species, species A and B. Species A, the body form goes this way, and then that way, and then go back, and then go here, go back, go, keep on back and forth. So that's the body form, the character change for species A. For species B, it keeps on going this way. Over time, slowly, the rate kind of varies a little bit, but the change is only one side. So for example, here, changes in the number of ribs across 8 trilobites lineages. So for first lineage 1, and then go back, and then for like this green one, 3, 4, 5, go back 4. No, so you can see that for some it's just keep on increasing from like 9.5 or something, and then 10 until 15. For some it keeps on back and forth. For some it's just 1. For some it starts to become stasis right there. So that is the example of character change. For lineage splitting, so lineage splitting is basically speciation. It's how the lineage starts to split and produce more species. So for example, here the parent organism starts to split into three species. So the blue one, green one, and red one. And then at this time, around that time, the blue one splits into another 3, the red one splits into another 3, the green one just maintains, and then few more speciation happens after that. Okay, that is lineage splitting or speciation. We will cover on how speciation comes to be later on in the course, not today, I think. Anyway, and the last one is extinction, as the name suggests. This is when species get extinct. Okay, so if you look here, all the species during this time, lots of the species extinct. So we can, but we have like 3 survivals here. So probably at this time, maybe there's a meteorite, maybe there's something happened to Earth that caused all these species to become extinct and only living a few of survivals. So that's extinction. Okay, so we cover that today. So that brings us to speciation. Okay, continue. Sorry, technical problem. Okay, so that brings us to speciation. And okay, but what is the definition of a species? If we look at these two, if we look at these two owls, both are owls, but are they the same species? They look slightly they look similar. They are not completely the same, but well, both are owls, so of course they look similar, right? But are they the same species? They are actually not the same species. So on the left is Athene noctua. It is the little owl, and for the right one is Athene cunicularia. It is a burrowing owl. Both are owls, but they are not the same species. What about these cats? Are they the same species? Both are cats. They look similar. They don't look the same, but both are cats. Are they the same species? What about dogs? Are they the same species? Like these two dogs, they are very different, right? If we look at the size, if we look at the, you know, well, particularly size, face, they don't look the same, but both are dogs. They have the similarities, but they are not the same, as well as the cats. But are they the same species? The cats, both of the cats are actually the same species. Both are Felis catus, and both of the dogs are the same species. They are Canis familiaris. So that brings us back to the question, what makes a species? Why the owls are not the same species, but the cats and the dogs are the same species? So what is the definition of species? Is it physical attributes? Probably not. We cannot really say when we look at the owls, when we look at the dogs, when we look at the cats. They look the same. They look similar, but the owls are not the same species, but the dogs and the cats are. What about the habitats? Maybe cannot. Lots of lots of organisms stay in the same habitats, but they are not the same species. What about behavior? Not really so, right? So what about ability to mate? That is actually the closest definition of a species. That is ability to mate. So that means that the two owls, they cannot mate with each other. They cannot produce offspring. And that makes them different species. The cats, although they look, they don't look the same, they look similar, but they can still mate with each other, as well as the dogs. So if we try to combine their reproductive cells together, they can still produce offspring, viable offspring. But problems with defining species with their mating ability is gray area exists because a lot of, one is because a lot of organisms reproduce sexually. Some species interbreed and produce hybrids, so gray area exists. Some organisms actually can reproduce sexually and asexually. So things can get a bit muddy there, a bit gray in this situation. So for example, species that interbreed and produce hybrids, tiger and lion. So tiger and lion, they are both different species, but they can still mate, they can still interbreed and produce hybrids. It's just that their hybrids cannot reproduce. Their hybrids are not, they are viable. They are not viable. They are sterile. So for example, here, we have here liger, and here we have tigon. So the liger has a lion father and a tiger as a mother, and tigon has a tiger as a mother and lion as the father, if I'm not mistaken. And so both of these, they are hybrids. They are a product of interspecies breeding. They themselves cannot have children. Yeah. So speciation, it's the event when a lineage splits into different species. So here, where the junctions are, these are the speciation events. So from one organism right here, from one organism right here at the bottom, splits into two, produce one organism, one species and another species. So the species that goes here is the obscura, and the species that go here again splits into two species. So eventually producing this one here and this one right here. So how does speciation happen? Speciation happen by three ways. The first one is geographic isolation. So these are the things that trigger and end speciation process. Okay, so geographic isolation can trigger, can encourage speciation to happen. Reduction in gene flow as well can trigger and cause speciation to happen. And also reproductive isolation is the final process that needs to happen so that the speciation process finish, like complete. So geographic isolation, as the name suggests, is an isolation like geographically. So it's a physically it's a physical isolation occurrence. So for example, here we have flies with red eyes here, if you can see on the banana. And then the banana from this land goes to this land right here, and the banana brings along the flies, the red eyes flies. But when the flies on this land starts to reproduce, to mate, they start to produce mutants. Okay, they start to produce mutants. They have mutations that give them that fitness to survive in the new land. So the mutation here, you can see they have green eyes. Okay, so after a while, the flies on this island, on this land, starts to mate with each other, start to have their own mutations, start to only mate with each other, and this land, and the flies on this land starts to mate. They mate with each other, and they stay without that mutation. So after a while, when the flies on this land goes back to the flies on this land, so the fly on this land have already gathered their own mutation and creates their own mating ritual and things like that. Even when they start to integrate back with the old population of flies, they don't mate with each other anymore. They have created their own new species. So even when they live on the same land right here, you can see that the flies with the green eyes only mate with each other, and the flies with the red eyes only mate with each other. They have developed their own species. So the speciation has happened. So like if we draw it as a diagram like this, so we can see that, okay, from one population of beetles, so this land suddenly has like a water to flow in between, that flow in the middle of the land, creating two different populations that is isolated, that is divided by this water. So maybe it's a river. Okay, so that river splits the land into two, so splits the population into two populations. Over time, the population on this side keeps on breeding, and again, survival of the fittest. So on this side of the land, the beetles are a shade of brown. However, on this side of the land, they start to produce more. They start to have more green beetles. Okay, again, survival of the fittest and genetic drift, things like that. They all have a role to play during this speciation, during this development of species. Okay, so after that, after a while, the population in this land, they start to only have the green beetles. They start to develop green beetles species. And the population on this land, they start to develop a lighter color beetles, okay? So even when they start to meet each other again, they don't mate with each other because they have already developed their own species. So that's geographic isolation. It has a physical divider between the two populations. Another one that acts kind of similar is reduction in gene flow. In this case, there is no physical barrier, unlike the geographic isolation. There is no physical barrier, but because the land is so big, the population at this end of the land, at one end of the land, has kind of zero chance to mate with the population at the other end of the land. So for example, imagine if we don't have ships, if we don't have planes, if we don't have trains, okay? If all we have is our 2 feet to move, what is the probability of me mating, finding my husband from the other side of the world? Is pretty much zero, okay? Because we don't have that travel, that vehicle to bring me or bring the person at the other side of the earth to come together and get married and whatever. So it's the same, okay? In reduction of gene flow, because of the vast, the land size, it caused the population at the end, at one end, to not mate with population at the other end. So the possibility, the probability of mating reduce as it, what is the word? But you know what I mean, right? As it gets farther, the possibility gets lower. Okay, so that creates the organisms on this end to mate with each other, creating their own traits. Organisms, the individuals on this end, mating with each other and creating their own traits. In the middle, they mate with each other. They can go anywhere, but over time, it will create like a spectrum. The population, the individuals on this end has their own distinct traits. Population on this end have their own distinct traits. So after a while, they start to separate. Okay, so the gene flow starts to reduce from this end to this end and from this end to that end. So reproductive, so that's geographic isolation and reduction in gene flow. The last one is reproductive isolation. So reproductive isolation, it prevents mating between different incipient species. Wait a second. Okay. So it prevents mating between different incipient species. So incipient species is species that is in the process of in the process of becoming another species. So it is reproductive isolation is necessary to end speciation process. It may happen by the evolution of different mating rituals, time or location, lack of fit between sexual organs, and offspring unviability or sterility. Wait a second. So anyway, this week's word is computer. Okay. So reproductive isolation. So this is the evolution of different mating rituals, time or location. You can see here this bird and the bird that create this. They are actually from the same parent species. But after a while, they start to develop different mating rituals. So this bird right here, its mating ritual is to build this and collect all these blue things and decorate its mating place with these blue things. That's how they like attract the opposite sex. But this one right here, they just built this thing to attract the mate. So you can imagine that even though they have the same parent species, but because they have different ways of attracting the mate, they cannot mate with each other. Okay, the mating rituals is different. So two individuals from different species here, from different incipient species, they cannot meet with each other. So they start to create this reproductive isolation. Another reproductive isolation is lack of fit between sexual organs. Like, for example, here, damselfly penises, they are different. So when physiologically, when the reproductive organ don't match, of course, you cannot have these two animals to reproduce, to have that sexual relation and have and produce offspring. Another one is offspring unviability or sterility. So again, Tygon and Liger, although they are a product of interbreeding, but they themselves cannot produce offspring. So that is considered as reproductive isolation as well. Okay, so it means that although the interbreeding works and produce an offspring, but that offspring cannot reproduce and bring that gene down to the next generation. So evidence for speciation. Populations of the same species in different locations would be genetically different. Evidence of allopatric speciation. Note, these are not yet different species, like for this owl and this owl. Excuse me. So both are spotted owl, but because they start to live only, they start to live on different habitat, geographically different place. So they start to develop their own trait, and they start to have that speciation process. Okay, like these two, they are still the same species, but they live on different locations and they are genetically different. although they are still the same species. So over time, you can imagine that these two owls, they will develop more and more of their own trait, and they will start to become more and more different from the other spotted owl. And until one day they cannot mate with each other, and that will complete the speciation process. And people have emulate the speciation process in a lab, in an experiment. So what they did was they took a bunch of fruit flies, so the same species. They start to put these fruit flies into two different container, I would say, two different habitats. Give one box of one group of fruit flies, different food, another group of fruit flies, a different food. So after generations, when they group these two fruit flies together again, they don't mate with each other anymore. They have developed their own species. And so we have talked about how from one species, they can get divided either geographically or either reduction of gene flow, because geographically they are just too far away to mate with each other. And over time, they will develop their own traits. They will start to develop their own species. They start to develop their own species, and if the reproductive isolation happens, that will end that speciation process. However, what happens when during that process, these two population that is starting to develop their own species starts to merge back. So this is what happens here. Okay, number one. So two incipient species, so they are in the process of speciation. They start to merge back together. They start to have secondary contact, okay, with each other. When that happens, the first possibility is they can fuse back together, and they can create kind of the original population. And if and another possibility is during the secondary contact, formation of low fitness hybrids. So they have hybrids here, and because the hybrids has a low fitness, that means that they cannot survive and reproduce, and they just cannot survive. Over time they just die off. That when that happens, the speciation actually continues to happen. Okay, because the hybrids cannot survive, they kind of produce like a barrier in between the two incipient species, and then because the new species has higher fitness level, so they will continue to survive, and at the end speciation happens. They can produce two species at the end. Okay, and what happens if the species has happened? So original population, geographic isolation, and then the species, incipient species develop their own species, start to almost at the end of the process, and then suddenly they start to merge with each other again. Again, this can happen like the first one. The hybrid, if the hybrid can survive, has quite a good fitness level, they can survive and they can kind of produce this hybrid zone contact, and they can kind of produce like a spectrum. So this species, and kind of in between. Okay, And that is called here stable or transient hybrid zone formation. And if similar to the third one, but the hybrid, instead of able to mate with this side and that side, the hybrid only mate with each other. So hybrid mates with hybrid. The species on this end mate only with themselves, and the species on this end mate only with themselves. So when that happened, after a while, after when time passed by, at the end, the hybrid will create its own species. So the hybrid has its own species. The species on this side has its own species, and the species on this side has its own species. So end up with, instead of a 2, we can end up with 3 species. Okay, so that's the end of speciation. So what have we learned today? We have learned about component of biosphere. That's last time. We have learned about basic mechanism of evolution. Today we've covered evolution and speciation. So we've covered basic mechanisms of evolution. So natural selection, mutation, genetic drift, migration. We have also covered definition of species, and also we have covered process of speciation, which is geographic isolation, reduction of gene flow, and also reproductive isolation. So for more information, you can go here, evolutionberkeley.edu. This website has everything about evolution. Of course, you can always go to BioLibreText. They also talk about evolution of that. And if you have any question after looking and you don't understand things, you can come to me. And that's it. And do not forget to answer the quiz on Easy Class for your attendance. And next week we have test 1, but I think I would want to do it not on a Tuesday or Wednesday. I think I want to do it on a Friday, and I'll communicate with you guys which time on a Friday that is suitable for all of you to do the test 1. Okay, and it will be a short answer question or slightly long answer question, not multiple choice question. Everything is, you need to write something. Okay, no essay question. I think everything is kind of short answer, a little bit of explanation, bullet points. It will cover last week's lecture and this week's lecture, so study that. And that's it. Just make sure you understand what I have taught during these 2 weeks. Okay. All right, that's all. Don't forget to answer the quiz for your attendance on Easy Class. Bye. 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 Bye.